The morning sun cast a warm golden glow over Eagle County Airport in Colorado, glinting off the sleek fuselage of a private jet that waited patiently on the tarmac. Its pristine white exterior gleamed against the rugged backdrop of snow-dusted mountains, a symbol of luxury and exclusivity. The jet had been chartered at the last minute, and Captain Thomas Morris, a seasoned pilot with over 20 years of experience, was preparing for what he assumed would be a routine flight. He scanned the manifest again, confirming the details he had received from operations. One VIP, one guest. That was all the information he had. The VIP's name was listed, Ariana Cole. Morris had heard the name before but assumed it belonged to some wealthy executive whose photo he didn't recognize. Like most people in his line of work, he mentally categorized his passengers based on experience. Older men in suits, CEOs of tech companies, or well-known entrepreneurs with flashy lifestyles. He never imagined the reality. Captain Morris had a reputation among his crew for being courteous yet firm. He was precise about protocol and expected the same from passengers. But he had also learned over decades of flying that first impressions often guided behavior. He assumed Ariana Cole's guest, if she had one, would be someone important, someone he needed to accommodate delicately. What he didn't anticipate was the presence of the passenger herself. As the cabin crew made their final checks, the tarmac came alive with activity. Ground staff guided vehicles, wheeled luggage across the sun-warmed concrete, and waved to the approaching passenger. Then she arrived. Ariana Cole stepped out of a sleek black SUV, her posture impeccable, her stride deliberate and confident. She was dressed simply, a tailored cream coat, black trousers, and polished shoes. Nothing flashy, nothing ostentatious. Her hair was neatly styled, her accessories minimal. But there was an undeniable presence about her, the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously, even when underestimated. Captain Morris, watching from the cockpit, barely paid her attention at first. He assumed she was the guest accompanying the VIP, a polite nod to convention rather than the main passenger. What struck him, initially, was her calm demeanor. Unlike most travelers, she didn't seem hurried, anxious, or impatient. She walked with purpose, scanning the jet with interest yet exuding an air of familiarity, as though she had stepped into a space she belonged in. The cabin doors opened, and Ariana's small entourage, really just a personal assistant and a single staff member, followed her inside. The crew quickly moved to greet her, but Captain Morris stayed near the cockpit, scanning the seating arrangement. He noted her choice of seat, the left-side leather recliner near the cockpit, a spot he instinctively knew to be reserved for the owner or the primary VIP. A flicker of irritation passed through him. He assumed, naturally, that she didn't yet realize the protocol and would move once asked politely. He approached, forcing a professional smile. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome aboard," he said, trying to maintain a tone of polite authority. Ariana turned to him, meeting his gaze with a quiet curiosity that made him uncomfortable for a fraction of a second. Her eyes were sharp, attentive, and measured, betraying none of the amusement that he would later realize lingered there. "I see you've chosen the left-side seat," Morris continued. "Normally, the owner prefers to sit there. Would you mind taking the seat in the rear?" Ariana tilted her head slightly, studying him without a word. For a moment, silence hung in the cabin, punctuated only by the soft hum of the jet's systems coming online. She was not angry. She did not scowl or challenge him outright. She simply observed. Her calmness made the tension in the small space palpable. "And who might the owner be?" she asked, her voice soft but deliberate, testing him without revealing too much. Morris hesitated. He blinked, momentarily thrown off by the question. "Well, the person funding the flight," he said, his voice carrying a nervous edge he did not intend. "The VIP listed on the manifest that, who?" he trailed off, realizing he was fumbling through words. Ariana allowed a small smile to play across her lips, just enough to hint at amusement but not enough to reveal her identity. She had learned over the years that people often underestimated her. Her calm silence was a tool, a way to observe without reacting, to gauge intentions without giving anything away. Morris, by contrast, continued with his polite insistence, completely unaware of the irony in his words. Meanwhile, the flight attendant, Lena, had entered the cabin to check on Ariana. Lena's eyes widened as she noticed the woman sitting in the front seat. She whispered to her colleague, "Isn't that Ariana Cole?" The other flight attendant, equally surprised, nodded. They exchanged glances, realizing that the person being asked to move was not just any passenger. She was the billionaire owner of the jet and one of the largest investors in the aviation company itself. The tension in the cabin became a silent drama. Captain Morris, unaware of the whispers and the truth, continued explaining protocol. "It's standard procedure," he said, gesturing toward the back of the cabin. "The owner's seat is reserved, and I need to ensure everything is in order." Ariana nodded slowly, letting him speak. She didn't interrupt, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she allowed the words to wash over her, her expression neutral yet unreadable. In the past, she had experienced this countless times. Assumptions based on appearance, demeanor, race, or gender. People often projected expectations onto her, never realizing that the quiet figure before them often held the most influence. Her assistant, sensing the tension, quietly moved to place luggage in the overhead bins. Lena, the flight attendant, tried to intervene subtly but did not want to embarrass the pilot. The cabin crew exchanged silent glances, realizing this was not a typical flight. Morris finally straightened, trying to regain composure. "I hope you understand, ma'am. It's only a matter of protocol. The owner's seat is important." Ariana's eyes met his again, calm and unwavering. She could see his nervousness, the slight flush of embarrassment, the rigid posture. And she understood exactly what was happening. Assumptions, biases, and the subtle power dynamics that so often dictated interactions. Yet she remained seated, serene and deliberate. The jet engine started to hum, signaling the imminent departure. The tarmac staff waved, the assistant double-checked the cabin, and the world outside seemed distant. Inside, a quiet confrontation had begun, not with anger but with observation. Ariana's calmness was her authority, her silence a way of asserting control without confrontation. Captain Morris, meanwhile, remained unaware that the woman before him was not a guest, not a minor passenger, but the very person who owned the plane, signed the checks, and determined the futures of countless employees, including himself. His assumptions, based purely on appearances, had led him to challenge someone far more powerful than he could have imagined. So the stage was set. The flight had not yet left the tarmac, yet the real journey, one of perception, respect, and quiet authority, had already begun. Ariana, the unexpected passenger, was calm, poised, and fully aware of the unfolding situation. Captain Morris, meanwhile, would soon learn a lesson that could not be taught in any manual, airline protocol, or training seminar. Never judge a person by the seat they occupy, the quiet they maintain, or the assumptions you make about their role. The jet prepared for departure, engines warming, doors sealed. The mountains loomed in the distance, vast and indifferent. Inside, a drama of silence, power, and revelation quietly unfolded, promising a flight that would be remembered by all aboard, not for turbulence, speed, or luxury, but for a lesson in humility, perception, and the invisible strength of a woman underestimated too many times. Captain Thomas Morris felt a flicker of unease as he approached the seat Ariana had chosen. His mind raced with protocol, procedure, and what he believed to be polite authority. He had seen countless passengers on private jets, and he was accustomed to assumptions. The owner sat up front, the guest sat behind, and any deviation from that order required explanation. But Ariana Cole, calm, composed, and seemingly oblivious to the unspoken rules, sat where she pleased. "Ma'am," Morris began, trying to sound confident, "that seat is normally reserved for the owner. Would you mind taking one of the seats toward the rear?" Ariana tilted her head slightly, studying him. There was no anger in her eyes, no impatience. just a measured curiosity as though she were observing a child learning rules for the first time. "And who exactly is the owner?" she asked, her voice calm but deliberate. The pilot blinked. He hadn't expected the question. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. "Well, the VIP listed on the manifest," he stammered, gesturing vaguely toward her. "The person funding this flight, obviously." Ariana's lips curved into a faint smile. Not mocking, not cruel, just a subtle acknowledgement that he had underestimated her. She didn't correct him immediately. Instead, she allowed him to continue, letting his assumptions unravel on their own. Morris, sensing some hesitation in her silence, pressed on. "It's really just protocol," he said. "High-profile passengers, they generally prefer certain seats. It's standard procedure. I'm sure you understand." Ariana raised an eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. "I see," she said softly. "So, protocol matters more than presence." Her tone was even, measured, and tinged with quiet amusement. Morris paused, suddenly aware that her question had more weight than he anticipated. He fumbled for words, glancing toward the cabin crew, hoping one of them would step in. Lena, the flight attendant, glanced at him nervously. She knew who Ariana Cole was, the billionaire owner of the jet, but she remained quiet, unwilling to reveal the truth prematurely. If Morris realized who was sitting in front of him, his ego would take a heavy blow. It was almost too good to intervene now. "Protocol is important," Morris said finally, his voice wavering slightly. "We try to maintain a certain order on these flights." He gestured to the back again. "The rear seats are fully comfortable. I assure you, you'll enjoy them just as much." Ariana leaned back slightly, her composure perfect. "I'm sure I would," she replied, but she made no move to get up. Her calm defiance was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried an undeniable weight. She had long ago learned the power of patience, of observing, measuring, and letting others reveal themselves through their assumptions. The pilot, oblivious to the reality, mistook her silence for compliance. He assumed she would eventually see the logic in his argument and move. He did not anticipate that he had misjudged the situation entirely. The quiet tension between them was almost theatrical, a silent standoff, punctuated only by the faint hum of the jet's systems and the muted rustle of the cabin crew preparing for departure. Meanwhile, Lena leaned closer to her colleague, whispering under her breath, "I told you, that's Ariana Cole, the real owner." Her colleague's eyes widened in surprise. They exchanged nervous glances, trying to gauge how much the pilot had realized. Lena whispered, "Don't say anything yet, just watch." Captain Morris, still unaware, continued with his explanation. "The owner's seat is here for a reason," he said, his tone polite but firm. "It's about visibility, access to the cockpit, and overall command of the flight." Ariana's eyes softened slightly, but her expression remained calm. "Visibility and access," she repeated, almost to herself. "Interesting." She let the words hang in the air, allowing Morris to continue, giving him the illusion of authority while she silently assessed the situation. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice in what he believed was a confidential explanation. "You understand, ma'am, that the owner's seat is more than just a chair. It's a symbol of authority. I'm sure you can appreciate that." Ariana nodded slowly, letting her gaze drift to the window for a brief moment. "Authority is a curious thing," she murmured. "Often, it is assumed based on appearances rather than reality." Her words were subtle, almost conversational, yet they carried a quiet sting, a gentle reminder that assumptions could be misleading. Morris blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected the passenger to challenge him, even indirectly. His confidence wavered. He looked toward the cabin crew again, desperate for some support. Lena gave a subtle shrug, her expression neutral. She wouldn't intervene, not yet. The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible. It was the kind of silence that demanded attention, forcing reflection. Captain Morris shifted uncomfortably, realizing that something about this passenger was different. She was not just a client. She carried herself with a confidence that was unshakable, a calm that spoke of experience, authority, and power. Yet there was no display, no arrogance, no overt assertion of dominance. She simply existed, and it was enough to unsettle anyone who relied on assumptions to gauge authority. Finally, Morris spoke again, trying to reclaim control. "I'm just trying to ensure the flight goes smoothly," he said. "I hope you understand, ma'am, it's nothing personal." Ariana's gaze returned to him, steady and unwavering. "I understand perfectly," she replied. "But sometimes protocol is less important than perception, and perception can be misleading." Her tone was gentle, yet firm, leaving no room for debate. The pilot felt a flicker of unease. There was something in her calm demeanor, in the measured way she spoke, that made him question his assumptions. Yet he remained polite, unwilling to escalate the situation further. He gestured toward the rear seats again, forcing a smile he hoped looked confident. "I promise the rear is quite comfortable," he said, "and you'll have complete privacy." Ariana leaned back slightly, allowing herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She didn't need to move. She didn't need to assert authority overtly. Her presence alone was commanding, her quiet confidence enough to unsettle even the most seasoned professional. The engines of the jet began to warm, a low hum filling the cabin. The tarmac staff signaled that it was time for departure. The world outside continued in its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding inside a private jet that would soon carry its passengers above the clouds. Captain Morris straightened, trying to regain composure. He had handled countless VIPs over his career, yet there was something different about Ariana Cole. He couldn't place it, but he sensed the weight of his misjudgment looming, even if he didn't yet fully understand why. Ariana, meanwhile, remained seated, calm, observing, and fully aware. She had experienced this countless times in her life, being underestimated, misjudged, and overlooked. And yet, she had learned the power of silence, of letting others reveal themselves through their assumptions, and of asserting authority without aggression. The stage was set for a flight that would not be ordinary. The assumptions of a pilot, the subtle power dynamics, and the quiet authority of a billionaire passenger were all converging in a delicate balance. The journey had not yet begun, but the lesson, one of perception, respect, and humility, was already unfolding. Captain Morris took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He would soon learn that appearances were deceiving, that authority could be quiet and commanding simultaneously, and that a single moment of assumption could lead to the most humbling of revelations. As Ariana adjusted in her seat, the sun glinting off her tablet, she allowed herself a private smile. She was not concerned with the pilot's misjudgment. She knew who she was, what she had built, and the quiet power she wielded. The flight had just begun, and yet the first lesson had already been delivered. Assumptions are fragile, and authority is often invisible until it is acknowledged. The engines roared softly, the cabin lights glimmered, and the jet taxied toward the runway. Outside, the world remained blissfully unaware of the silent confrontation that had taken place within its confines. Inside, however, a quiet drama of perception, patience, and power was unfolding, one that would leave an indelible mark on everyone aboard. The cabin of the private jet was silent except for the faint hum of the pre-flight systems. Captain Thomas Morris retreated slightly toward the cockpit, muttering to himself under his breath about protocol, VIPs, and proper procedure. Ariana Cole remained seated near the cockpit, her posture perfect, her gaze steady. She had not moved, not flinched, not even shifted uncomfortably. Yet the very act of staying in her seat, calm and deliberate, created a tension far thicker than any spoken words. Morris, a man accustomed to commanding attention and compliance, was unprepared for this quiet defiance. He had dealt with difficult passengers before, but none had possessed the serene, almost regal composure that Ariana exuded. Her silence was more powerful than a raised voice. It forced him to confront his assumptions, revealing the fragility of the authority he had so confidently wielded. He cleared his throat and tried again. Ma'am, I really must insist that you take a seat in the rear. It's not just protocol, it's about ensuring comfort and proper order for everyone on board. I'm sure you understand. Ariana's eyes met his, unblinking, steady. I understand perfectly, she said softly, her tone calm but layered with quiet strength. But I also understand that assumptions often reveal more about the person making them than the person being judged. Morris faltered, momentarily speechless. He hadn't expected a response so composed, so deliberate. He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling to find a response that would maintain the semblance of authority. He realized slowly that his polite insistence had transformed into a challenge to someone far more powerful than he could see. From her seat, Ariana leaned back slightly, folding her hands over her lap. She allowed herself the smallest, almost imperceptible smile, one that hinted at amusement but concealed everything else. She had long ago learned the power of subtlety. There was no need to assert dominance overtly. Sometimes, the quietest presence could exert the most influence. Meanwhile, the flight attendant, Lena, watched the interaction with growing unease. She had recognized Ariana immediately, but the pilot did not yet know. The silent tension between the two made her nervous. She whispered to her colleague, "This isn't going to end well if he keeps pushing." Her colleague nodded, equally aware of the delicate situation, yet neither intervened. The drama unfolding before them was instructive in itself, a lesson in perception, power, and respect. Morris, oblivious to the whispers behind him, attempted another tact. "Ma'am, I assure you, the rear seats are fully equipped with all amenities. You'll have complete privacy and comfort." Ariana tilted her head, allowing her gaze to drift toward the rear briefly, then back to him. "Privacy and comfort are certainly appreciated," she said, her tone measured. "But I find that the perception of authority often carries more weight than comfort alone." Morris blinked, struggling to follow her meaning. Her words were not aggressive, not confrontational, yet they struck at the very foundation of his confidence. The realization began to settle in. The passenger he had assumed would comply without question was challenging his authority without ever raising her voice. The pilot attempted to reassert control, his hands gripping the edge of the seat near the cockpit. "It's really just a matter of protocol," he said again, trying to sound more firm. "We've had hundreds of flights, and this procedure ensures everything runs smoothly. I'm sure you appreciate the importance of order." Ariana's expression remained calm. "Order is important, certainly," she replied. "But so is the recognition that authority is not always visible to the eye, nor is it always asserted loudly. Some authority is quiet, unassuming, and entirely independent of the assumptions others make about it." The pilot's confidence wavered further. He glanced at Lena, who raised her eyebrows slightly and looked away. He realized he had no support here. The passenger before him was calm, measured, and in control of the interaction, even if he could not yet comprehend why. In that moment, a shift occurred. What had begun as a polite insistence became a subtle confrontation of ego, perception, and unspoken biases. Morris was forced to examine his assumptions. The quiet black woman seated in the owner's chair was not reacting with anger, fear, or defensiveness. She simply existed, commanding space without needing to assert dominance. Ariana's assistant moved quietly to place a small leather bag in the overhead compartment. Her movements were efficient but unobtrusive, a mirror of Ariana's composed energy. The cabin crew exchanged nervous glances, sensing the tension but unsure how far it would escalate. They knew something had changed. The pilot's polite authority was faltering in the face of a presence he could not read or categorize. Morris attempted one more time, his voice tinged with desperation. "I really do hope you'll understand. It's nothing personal. I'm just trying to maintain proper order." Ariana's gaze held his. "I understand your concern," she said softly, "and I appreciate your attempt to maintain order, but it is often the case that the person who assumes authority first is not the one who truly holds it." Her words were quiet, almost conversational, yet their impact was profound. Morris felt a flush of embarrassment creep across his face. He had assumed, based on appearances and protocol, that he held power in this interaction. Instead, he realized that his assumptions had left him vulnerable to an authority he had not recognized. The engines began their gentle hum as the plane prepared for departure. Outside, the sun sparkled off the tarmac, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding inside. Inside, every gesture, glance, and word carried weight. Ariana remained calm, her hands folded neatly, her eyes steady, her presence commanding in the subtlest way. Morris, despite his decades of experience, felt increasingly uncomfortable. He had faced demanding CEOs, impatient celebrities, and high-strung politicians, but none had required him to confront his own assumptions so directly, so elegantly, and without confrontation. Ariana's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with his growing unease. She did not seek conflict. She simply existed as herself, fully aware of the imbalance between perception and reality. The quiet dignity of her presence emphasized the fragility of assumptions, exposing the pilot's misjudgment without a single raised voice. The cabin crew remained silent observers. Lena whispered again, "This is incredible. He has no idea who she is." Her colleague nodded, equally awed by the subtle power dynamics at play. It was a lesson in humility, perception, and the invisible strength of authority. Morris adjusted his uniform, cleared his throat, and attempted a final assertion of control. "Ma'am, please, the rear seats." Ariana interrupted gently, her voice calm yet unyielding. "Captain, I am perfectly content here. Perhaps it is time to reconsider the importance of assumptions and how they can mislead even the most experienced." The words were simple, yet the meaning was profound. Morris finally realized that he had been mistaken. The passenger seated before him, the one he had assumed was a guest, was commanding respect through presence, not through protocol or intimidation. She embodied authority in a way that required recognition, not confrontation. In that moment, the quiet disrespect he had felt he was enforcing, asking her to move from the seat he assumed belonged to the VIP, turned inward. He had assumed authority where there was none, and in doing so, revealed the limitations of his own perception. Ariana, calm and poised, leaned back in her seat. The subtle smile on her lips was one of quiet victory, not vindictive, but reflective. She did not need to assert dominance overtly. Her presence, her patience, and her measured responses had already conveyed a lesson in humility and perception. The engines hummed louder now, signaling that the plane would soon leave the tarmac. Captain Morris straightened once more, adjusting his tie, trying to regain composure, but the weight of his misjudgment lingered. He had been challenged without confrontation, corrected without anger, and humbled without hostility. The quiet drama of the cabin, the subtle clash of assumptions versus reality, had not yet reached its peak. But the first lesson was already clear. Respect is not demanded. It is observed, recognized, and earned, often in ways that are quiet, understated, and invisible to those blinded by assumptions. Ariana looked out the window briefly, watching the sun glint off the mountains. She was calm, composed, and fully aware of her own authority. The pilot, by contrast, felt the sting of humility creeping in, the weight of his assumptions pressing down upon him. The flight had not yet begun, yet its first lesson had already been delivered, a lesson in respect, perception, and the subtle power of a quiet presence. As the jet taxied toward the runway, the cabin was filled with a palpable tension, invisible to the outside world. Inside, the subtle dynamics between the pilot, the billionaire passenger, and the crew had set the stage for a journey that would be remembered not for luxury or speed, but for the quiet demonstration of authority, humility, and perception. The cabin of the private jet hummed with the quiet energy of engines warming, overhead compartments closing, and the subtle rustle of paperwork and equipment. Captain Thomas Morris sat in the cockpit, nervously reviewing his pre-flight checklist, yet a strange feeling gnawed at him. Something about the calm composure of the passenger seated just a few feet away unsettled him. He couldn't place it, but it was there, an intangible weight, the kind that made even seasoned pilots question their instincts. Meanwhile in the cabin, Lena, the flight attendant, tried to maintain her usual professional composure, but her eyes kept drifting toward Ariana Cole, seated confidently near the cockpit. She had been in aviation long enough to recognize VIPs and high-profile passengers instantly, and yet even she had paused when she realized who was sitting quietly in the front seat. "Isn't that Ariana Cole?" she whispered to her colleague, barely moving her lips. Her colleague's eyes widened, confirming her suspicion. "It can't be," he whispered back, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "She's the owner. That's impossible." The two exchanged nervous glances, aware that any misstep now could create an awkward situation. Lena shook her head slightly, her lips pressed together in thought. "We can't say anything yet. Let him figure it out on his own. It'll be educational," she murmured, a small, amused smirk crossing her face. Captain Morris, completely unaware of the crew's whispered realization, continued to hover near the cockpit, trying to project authority while feeling increasingly uncomfortable. He kept glancing at Ariana, noting her calm demeanor, her impeccable posture, the serene way she observed the cabin. He had been trained to read passengers for signs of nervousness, agitation, or anxiety, yet Ariana radiated none of these. Instead, she exuded an authority that he could not define, a silent command that unsettled him more than any confrontation ever had. Ariana, for her part, noticed the nervous energy in the cabin crew, but paid it little attention. She had learned long ago that people often overestimate the importance of their own judgments and underestimate the quiet confidence of others. She allowed the whispers and glances to pass unnoticed, focusing instead on the view outside the window and the small details of her surroundings. Yet she was fully aware of the unspoken tension that had taken root in the cabin. The pilot, still convinced of his control, attempted once more to assert his authority. "Ma'am, I really do need you to consider moving to the rear. The seat you're occupying is standard for owners, and it helps maintain proper order and protocol." Ariana's gaze shifted slightly, her eyes meeting his in a calm, deliberate stare. "I understand," she said softly, "but it seems that assumptions, like protocol, are sometimes applied without consideration for reality. It's fascinating how people often presume authority based on appearances alone." Morris faltered. He had expected a polite compliance, perhaps a light disagreement, but not this measured observation that cut through his assumptions with surgical precision. His mind raced. Could it be that he had misread her entirely? No, that was impossible. She seemed ordinary, refined, calm. She couldn't possibly be the owner, could she? Meanwhile, Lena's whispers escalated slightly, just enough for the crew member next to her to hear. "Do you see how he's acting? He doesn't have a clue." Her colleague nodded, eyes wide. "He has no idea, and she's letting him make a fool of himself quietly." Lena smiled faintly. She had witnessed many powerful people in her career, but there was something different about Ariana Cole. She didn't need to assert power overtly. Her presence alone commanded it. Her calm patience, the way she allowed assumptions to surface before revealing the truth, was an artistry in itself. The pilot attempted to regain composure, clearing his throat and adjusting his uniform. "Ma'am, the rear seat is equipped with the same amenities as this one," he said, trying to sound more confident, more authoritative. "You'll have privacy, comfort, and a perfect view of the cabin." Ariana's lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. "Privacy and comfort are certainly appreciated," she said softly, "but the perception of authority, once assumed incorrectly, can be far more impactful than the seat itself." The crew, observing quietly, exchanged barely perceptible glances, acknowledging the quiet brilliance of her response. The pilot, still unaware, felt a prick of unease. Something about her words, her calm demeanor, her unflinching gaze, forced him to question everything he thought he knew about the situation. Outside the window, the mountains shimmered in the morning light, indifferent to the tension inside the cabin. The staff on the tarmac continued their duties, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding just above them. Inside, however, every gesture, glance, and word carried weight. Ariana remained seated, composed, her authority subtle yet undeniable. The whispers continued among the crew. Lena leaned closer to her colleague. "He's going to realize soon, just wait for it. He won't know what hit him." Her colleague nodded, barely able to contain his anticipation. They had both worked on private jets before, but rarely had they witnessed such a perfectly orchestrated reversal of power, quiet, deliberate, and entirely unforced. It was the kind of moment that would be remembered long after the flight ended. Captain Morris, meanwhile, tried one last approach. "I'm only trying to ensure that the flight goes smoothly," he said, his voice slightly trembling despite his efforts to remain steady. "The rear seat is available, fully prepared, and more appropriate for guests." Ariana's eyes held his, calm and unwavering. "Captain," she said softly, "I appreciate your concern for protocol, but perhaps the flight will run more smoothly if assumptions are set aside and reality is acknowledged for what it is." The pilot froze, caught mid-thought. Reality. That single word struck him more forcefully than any confrontation ever could. Could it be possible that he had misjudged her entirely? That the assumptions he had relied upon for decades of flying VIPs were entirely misplaced? The cabin crew, now fully aware of the truth, could no longer contain their curiosity. Lena glanced at the co-pilot, whispering, "We should probably tell him soon before takeoff. Otherwise, it's going to be disastrous for his ego." The co-pilot shook his head subtly, equally nervous. "Let's wait. She's letting him figure it out. It's more effective that way." Captain Morris, meanwhile, adjusted in his seat, trying to maintain composure. He glanced at the passenger again. Ariana Cole, calm, poised, and seemingly indifferent to his unease, remained seated where she pleased. Her presence alone made him realize how fragile his assumptions had been. The person he had assumed was a guest, someone he could politely request to move, was far more powerful than he could have imagined. Ariana's subtle, quiet authority was almost painful to observe. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand attention, and yet every glance, every word, carried an unspoken command. Morris felt the weight of his own misjudgment pressing down on him, a lesson in humility he had not anticipated before the engines had even roared for takeoff. Outside, the mountains glimmered with early sunlight, and the jet's engines thrummed softly, signaling the imminent departure. Inside, the whispers among the crew continued, excitement mixed with awe. They had witnessed a rare demonstration of quiet power, one that demanded recognition not through force or authority, but simply by being present. The pilot, still unaware, adjusted his tie and took a deep breath, preparing for the moment he would inevitably realize the truth. He had misread the passenger completely, failed to recognize the authority she wielded, and assumed control where there was none. The quiet drama of assumptions versus reality was about to reach its first turning point. And Ariana Cole. She remained perfectly still, serene, and unbothered. She had allowed the pilot's assumptions to surface, quietly observed the tension among the crew, and maintained a calm authority that required no overt demonstration. The stage was set, the players in place, and the reveal, when it came, would leave an indelible impression on everyone aboard. The jet, engines humming steadily, began its slow taxi toward the runway. Outside, the world remained oblivious to the quiet revelation unfolding inside. But inside the cabin, a lesson in perception, humility, and the subtle power of quiet authority was already taking shape, preparing to leave its mark on Captain Thomas Morris forever. The private jet hummed steadily as it taxied toward the runway, its engines purring like a restless predator ready to soar. Captain Thomas Morris gripped the yoke, trying to maintain his focus on the checklist, but his mind kept drifting back to the passenger seated confidently near the cockpit. Ariana Cole. Calm, poised, and utterly unbothered, she seemed to radiate an authority that Morris could neither read nor understand. Every word she had spoken, every subtle glance, now played through his mind like a puzzle he could not solve. He had encountered countless VIPs in his career, demanding actors, high-profile CEOs, even politicians with inflated egos. But none had left him feeling as unsettled as this woman did, not through aggression, not through dominance, but simply by being. Her calm, measured presence had challenged him at every step, exposing the fragility of his assumptions and the limits of his perception. He felt the first stirrings of dread creeping in, the awareness that he had misjudged her completely. The cabin crew, for their part, exchanged glances behind his back. Lena, the flight attendant, had been biting her lip to suppress a smile. The other attendants were equally tense, knowing that the revelation of Ariana Cole's identity would be nothing short of dramatic. Lena leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "It's time. He's about to find out." Morris, still oblivious, continued his polite insistence on protocol. "Ma'am, I just want to ensure that the flight proceeds smoothly. The rear seats offer complete comfort and privacy. It's really the best option for, well, all passengers." Ariana's gaze met his, calm and unwavering. "Captain," she said softly, "I appreciate your concern for protocol, but perhaps your attention would be better focused on the flight itself rather than assumptions about who should sit where." Morris swallowed hard. Something about her voice, her calmness, and the subtle authority in her tone made him realize that this was no ordinary passenger. Yet he still had no idea who she really was. His mind raced, trying to reconcile her quiet presence with the uncomfortable feeling that he was being outmaneuvered without even realizing it. Then the call came. From the operations manager in the ground office, a voice crackled through the cockpit radio. "Captain Morris," the manager said, voice brisk but friendly, "please ensure that Ms. Ariana Cole is comfortable. She just increased her investment in the fleet. Make sure she has everything she needs." Morris froze mid-motion, the yoke trembling slightly under his grip. "Wait," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. His mind raced through possibilities, disbelief etching itself across his features. She's the owner. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. The calm, poised woman he had assumed to be a guest, the one he had repeatedly asked to move from the seat near the cockpit, was not a guest at all. She was the billionaire owner of the jet, the woman who determined the fleet's operations, who signed checks that affected hundreds of employees, and who had just subtly exposed his assumptions. He turned slowly toward Ariana, his face flushing a deep shade of crimson. She met his gaze with perfect calm, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. She had seen the recognition in his eyes, had watched as the shift of comprehension finally reached him. There was no malice in her expression, only the quiet satisfaction of a lesson delivered without confrontation. I didn't realize," Morris stammered, struggling to form words. I thought." His voice faltered as the enormity of his misjudgment sank in. Ariana leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. "Captain Morris," she said evenly, her tone calm but precise. "It happens often. People make assumptions based on appearances, and I've grown accustomed to it. What matters is not whether they recognize who I am immediately, but how they adjust once they do." The cabin crew, sensing the shift, could barely conceal their amusement. Lena smiled faintly, exchanging a glance with her colleague. The pilot's discomfort was palpable, yet Ariana's response was gracious, measured, and instructive. She had not scolded him. She had not demanded an apology. She had simply acknowledged the moment and allowed him to arrive at the truth himself. Morris swallowed hard, running a hand through his hair. "Miss Cole, I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you. I had no idea." Ariana nodded slowly. "I understand, Captain, and I appreciate your concern for protocol. But assumptions, even when well-intentioned, can often mislead. The important thing is how one responds once the truth becomes clear. He took a deep breath, trying to regain composure. I should have realized. I apologize sincerely. Ariana's gaze softened, but her composure remained flawless. Your apology is noted, Captain, but let us proceed with the flight. There is no need for further discomfort. Let this be a lesson in observation, patience, and humility. The pilot felt a mix of relief and embarrassment. He had been humbled without a single raised voice. The passenger, the person he had so casually misjudged, had commanded authority simply by existing with calm confidence. The lesson was unmistakable. Appearances could deceive, assumptions could mislead, and authority was not always visible on the surface. Outside, the mountains glittered under the morning sun, indifferent to the quiet revelation unfolding inside the cabin. Inside, however, the dynamic had shifted entirely. Captain Morris, humbled and acutely aware of his error, adjusted his uniform and attempted to focus on his duties. Ariana, serene and composed, returned her attention to the view outside, the quiet power of her presence now fully recognized. The atmosphere in the cabin relaxed slightly. The crew exchanged knowing glances, relieved that the tension had shifted from confrontation to understanding. The whispering ceased, replaced by the soft efficiency of pre-flight preparations. Lena adjusted the cabin lighting subtly, ensuring Ariana's comfort without intruding. Morris, still processing the revelation, took another deep breath. "Ms. Cole," he began cautiously, "I assure you from this point forward, your comfort and satisfaction are my highest priority." Ariana smiled faintly, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I am confident in your abilities, Captain. Just remember, authority is often quiet, perception is fragile, and assumptions can be dangerous. But I have faith in those who learn from their mistakes." Her words, calm and deliberate, struck him again. He felt the weight of humility pressing upon him, but it was tempered with gratitude. He had been shown the limits of his assumptions, the invisible strength of quiet authority, and the subtle power of observation. As the engines roared more insistently, signaling the imminent takeoff, Morris carefully followed the remaining pre-flight protocols. He glanced at Ariana one last time before taxiing toward the runway. She was calm, composed, and fully aware of her effect on the cabin, a presence that required no overt assertion, only acknowledgement. The jet surged forward, accelerating along the runway, and soon lifted gracefully into the sky. Outside, the mountains shrank beneath them, clouds stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Inside, a profound shift had taken place. Captain Morris, humbled and enlightened, adjusted his approach to the flight and to the passenger beside him. Ariana Cole reclined slightly, serene and thoughtful. She had not sought conflict, had not demanded recognition, and had not raised her voice. Yet she had asserted her authority with perfect precision, exposing assumptions, challenging perception, and leaving an indelible impression on everyone aboard. For Morris, the lesson was unforgettable. Assumptions had led him astray, but awareness, observation, and humility had corrected the course. And for Ariana, the quiet victory was complete. She had reminded everyone that power is not always loud, authority is not always visible, and respect is earned through recognition of truth, not fear or protocol. The jet soared higher, engines steady and confident. The cabin, once tense with unspoken conflict, now hummed with efficiency and subdued respect. The pilot's eyes remained forward, but his mind lingered on the encounter, the lesson, and the remarkable woman beside him who had transformed a simple seat assignment into a profound lesson in perception and authority. And in the quiet of the cabin, the hum of the engines beneath them, the revelation had been made. Assumptions are fragile, power is subtle, and humility, when earned through acknowledgement of truth, is enduring. Captain Thomas Morris sat in the cockpit, hands gripping the yoke with a mixture of tension and disbelief. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a steady, grounding presence against the storm of his thoughts. He had spent decades commanding flights, managing high-profile passengers, and navigating countless VIP personalities. Yet never had he felt so thoroughly humbled in his professional life. The realization that the calm, composed passenger he had repeatedly asked to move was, in fact, Ariana Cole, the billionaire owner of the plane and a major stakeholder in the fleet, weighed heavily on him. He exhaled slowly, attempting to steady his racing thoughts. How could he have been so blind, so quick to judge based on appearances? His mind replayed the entire exchange. The measured calm of her voice, the subtle authority in her gaze, the way she had challenged his assumptions without raising her voice or displaying aggression. Each moment now seemed like a masterclass in composure and unspoken power, and he had been completely oblivious. Summoning what courage he could muster, Morris finally left the cockpit, stepping lightly into the cabin. His uniform felt heavier than usual, his usual confident stride replaced by a tentative approach. Ariana remained seated near the cockpit, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked up at him with a calm, measured expression, as if already anticipating his arrival. "Ms. Cole," he began, his voice low and careful, I need to apologize. I misjudged you. I made assumptions that were completely inappropriate, and I realize now how disrespectful that was." Ariana's eyes met his, calm and unflinching. "Captain Morris," she said softly, her tone steady yet commanding, "acknowledging a mistake is always the first step, but understanding why it occurred and ensuring it does not repeat is where true growth begins." Morris nodded, swallowing hard. He could feel the heat of embarrassment rising to his face. He had been trained to navigate complex social situations, but nothing in his years of experience had prepared him for this. A subtle, quiet lesson delivered not with confrontation, but through presence, patience, and a careful command of perception. I should have recognized you immediately," he continued, his words halting. "I assumed, based on appearances and protocol, that you were a guest. I see now that my assumptions were wrong, and I deeply regret any discomfort I caused." Ariana tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but perceptive. "Captain, discomfort is subjective. What matters is awareness and response. You have recognized your error, which is important, but I hope you also recognize the broader lesson. Assumptions, no matter how well-intentioned, can undermine respect and professionalism." He swallowed again, trying to absorb the weight of her words. She was calm, yet each phrase carried authority, subtle, deliberate, unyielding. Morris realized that this apology was not merely about a seat on a jet. It was about humility, perception, and understanding the limits of one's assumptions. "I understand, Ms. Cole," he said finally. "And I assure you, from this point forward, I will conduct myself with the professionalism and respect that is due to you and to every passenger, regardless of appearance or perceived status." Ariana allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch her lips. "That is appreciated, Captain. Respect is not given because it is demanded. It is observed, recognized, and earned. It is about acknowledgement of truth, rather than assertion of authority." The cabin crew, observing the exchange quietly from their positions, exchanged subtle glances. Lena whispered to her colleague, "See, she doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. He's humbled already." Her colleague nodded, equally impressed by the quiet authority Ariana commanded. Morris took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Ms. Cole, I want you to know that I take full responsibility. It was never my intention to undermine you, and I hope you can accept my sincere apology." Ariana's gaze softened slightly, but her composure remained flawless. "Your acknowledgement is accepted, Captain. What matters now is how we proceed. This is a flight, and there are responsibilities to uphold for both safety and comfort." He nodded again, humbled but grateful. The lesson was clear. Humility could be learned not through embarrassment alone, but through observation, reflection, and the subtle guidance of someone who wielded authority without aggression. As the jet leveled off above the mountains, the engines humming steadily beneath them, Morris reflected on the encounter. He had assumed authority based on protocol and appearances, only to discover that true authority had been present all along, silent, observant, and entirely independent of the assumptions he had made. The experience left him introspective, a rare and humbling sensation for someone accustomed to command. Ariana reclined slightly in her seat, serene and thoughtful. She did not need to gloat or assert dominance. Her calm presence had already conveyed the lesson. Her eyes drifted to the clouds outside, golden light reflecting softly across her features. She allowed herself a private acknowledgement of the subtle victory. Assumptions challenged, perception corrected, authority quietly reaffirmed. Morris, meanwhile, attempted to refocus on the instruments before him. He felt the weight of the lesson deeply. He had learned something far more significant than any procedural guideline or protocol checklist. He had learned that authority could be quiet, power could be subtle, and respect was earned through recognition of reality, not assumption. The cabin was calm, the atmosphere now one of reflection rather than tension. The crew moved with efficiency, subtly ensuring Ariana's comfort while respecting her space. Every gesture, every small adjustment was conducted with a newfound awareness of who she truly was, the billionaire owner of the jet, a leader who commanded without confrontation, and a master of quiet influence. Morris finally spoke again, his voice low but steady. "Ms. Cole, if I may, I would like to thank you, not just for the opportunity to fly you, but for the lesson. I will carry it forward, both in my professional life and in how I perceive people. Your presence has changed my perspective." Ariana's lips curved into a slight, appreciative smile. "That is a thoughtful response, Captain. It is one thing to apologize. It is another to truly reflect on the reasons behind an action and its broader implications. Your acknowledgement of that difference is commendable." The jet sailed through the sky, clouds stretching endlessly beneath them. The sun glinted off the mountains, the light reflecting in subtle patterns across the cabin. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The quiet authority of Ariana Cole had transformed a potentially awkward situation into a profound lesson, one that would resonate with the pilot and crew for years to come. Captain Morris, humbled yet grateful, glanced at Ariana one last time. Her calm demeanor, poised expression, and quiet command of the situation left an indelible impression. She had not needed to assert dominance, raise her voice, or demand recognition. She had simply been herself, confident, composed, and entirely aware of the power she held simply by existing as she was. The realization settled over him fully. Assumptions were fragile, perception was unreliable, and true authority was often invisible until acknowledged. And Ariana Cole, with her quiet confidence and measured presence, had demonstrated all of this with perfect subtlety. As the jet continued its journey, Morris reflected on the profound lesson he had just experienced. He understood now that respect and recognition were not given automatically, even to someone seated in the owner's chair. They were earned through awareness, observation, and acknowledgement of reality. And in this moment, he had learned that lesson in its purest form. Ariana leaned back slightly, eyes still focused on the horizon. She did not need applause, gratitude, or acknowledgement. She was content knowing that her presence had subtly corrected assumptions, shifted perceptions, and imparted a lasting lesson. For her, the victory was quiet, unspoken, and entirely complete. Captain Morris, seated just a few feet away, exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of humility and gratitude in equal measure. He had faced a truth he had never anticipated, learned a lesson he would never forget, and experienced the quiet power of a woman who commanded authority without ever raising her voice. The flight continued smoothly, the jet soaring high above the mountains, engines steady and confident. And in the quiet, shared space of the cabin, a subtle shift had occurred, one that would resonate with everyone aboard long after the journey ended. The jet soared high above the snow-dusted peaks, sunlight glinting off the metallic wings, casting golden streaks across the cabin. Captain Thomas Morris adjusted the controls with meticulous attention, yet his mind was occupied less with flight mechanics and more with reflection on the events that had unfolded. Every glance toward Ariana Cole reminded him of his misjudgment earlier, the assumptions, the insistence on protocol, and the embarrassment he had only recently endured. Ariana sat composed in the front seat, calm, serene, yet fully aware of the quiet authority she commanded. She did not need to speak loudly to dominate the room. Her presence alone shaped the energy within the cabin. The subtle, almost imperceptible way she observed, assessed, and adjusted to the environment was a masterclass in influence. She had already humbled the pilot with a gentle, yet undeniable revelation of reality. Now she intended to guide him further, showing him not just the consequences of assumptions, but the deeper dynamics of leadership and control. "Captain Morris," she began softly, her tone casual yet commanding, "may I offer a suggestion?" Morris blinked, startled, but nodded quickly, eager to regain his composure and prove that he was still competent. "Of course, Ms. Cole," he replied, his voice slightly tentative. "Anything for a safe and smooth flight." Ariana's gaze met his, calm and unflinching. "I notice that your focus is entirely on the mechanics of flying, which is excellent. Precision is critical, but leadership is not only about control of instruments, it is also about awareness of the people, the environment, and the subtle dynamics at play." Morris swallowed hard, suddenly aware that this was not a rebuke but a teaching moment. I understand. I try to maintain awareness of all variables," he said carefully, glancing around the cabin. "Crew, passengers, weather, systems, everything." Ariana nodded, allowing him a moment of acknowledgement. "Good," she said softly. "Yet awareness also requires humility. Recognizing when assumptions may cloud judgment is just as important as technical skill. Leadership is as much about perception and adaptability as it is about knowledge." He exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been trained to follow protocol strictly, to trust the manuals and procedures above all else. Yet her insight challenged him to consider a more nuanced perspective, the human element, the subtle interplay of perception, authority, and influence. Elements he had largely ignored in his insistence on protocol were just as important as the technical skills he had honed over decades. "I think I understand," he said quietly. "Leadership, it's not just about asserting authority, it's about recognizing when others may hold influence that is not immediately visible." "Exactly," Ariana replied, her tone calm yet filled with quiet power. "Influence is often silent. Authority is often subtle. Those who recognize it and adjust accordingly gain far more than those who impose control without observation. You were quick to assume protocol dictated the flow of the flight, but overlooked the human dynamic entirely. That is where real leadership begins, in awareness, humility, and adaptation." The cabin crew exchanged subtle glances, barely suppressing smiles. They had witnessed many powerful individuals, but rarely someone who could teach such lessons with quiet presence and precision. Lena leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "She's not just correcting him, she's showing him how to lead with awareness. Watch, he'll never forget this flight." Morris felt a twinge of humility mixed with gratitude. He had always prided himself on experience, skill, and professionalism. Yet Ariana's calm guidance revealed a dimension of leadership he had never fully appreciated. The ability to perceive the unspoken, to recognize influence beyond titles and protocol, and to integrate that awareness into decision-making. He adjusted his posture, trying to absorb the lesson fully. "Ms. Cole," he said carefully, "I realize now that my assumptions clouded my judgment. I focused too much on the seat, the protocol, the checklist, and not enough on the broader dynamics, on the human elements that define authority." Ariana's gaze softened slightly, but her composure remained perfect. "That is correct, Captain. Humility allows awareness. Awareness allows adaptation. and adaptation allows true leadership. These are lessons not often taught in manuals or checklists, yet they are invaluable. Morris nodded slowly, feeling the weight of understanding settle over him. I see now. It's not about enforcing authority. It's about recognizing it, responding appropriately, and guiding outcomes without relying solely on assumptions or appearances. Precisely, Ariana said, her voice calm and deliberate. And let me add one more thought. Authority, like respect, is often earned in small, subtle ways. Observation, patience, and the ability to adapt to evolving circumstances can achieve more than control or command ever could. The pilot reflected on her words, glancing once more at the serene figure before him. Every detail, the calm posture, the quiet observation, the deliberate control of influence, served as a live demonstration of her insight. He realized he had been taught a lesson not in authority or protocol, but in perception, humility, and the subtle art of influence. Outside, the mountains stretched endlessly beneath the jet, their snow-capped peaks glinting in the sunlight. The plane soared smoothly, engine steady, wings cutting through the sky with precision. Inside, however, the real journey was taking place, not in miles or altitude, but in awareness, perspective, and understanding. Morris exhaled slowly, feeling a quiet resolve form within him. He would carry this lesson forward, not just as a lesson in humility, but as a guide for leadership. The encounter with Ariana Cole had exposed a gap in his perception and filled it with insight he could never have learned from manuals, checklists, or experience alone. Ariana, observing him closely, allowed a small, approving smile. She had not needed to assert dominance, demand respect, or overtly control the situation. Her presence, her patience, and her quiet guidance had already reshaped the pilot's understanding. She had taken control of the flight in the most subtle and effective way possible, through influence, demonstration, and awareness. The cabin crew, now fully aware of the dynamic, moved with renewed efficiency and quiet respect. Every gesture, every adjustment was made with mindfulness of the subtle authority in the cabin. The tension that had initially filled the air had been replaced by a calm recognition of insight, influence, and respect. Morris glanced once more at Ariana, his expression reflecting humility, reflection, and newfound understanding. "Ms. Cole," he said quietly, "thank you, not just for the lesson in protocol, but for showing me what true leadership and authority look like. I will carry this forward both in the cockpit and beyond." Ariana's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Captain, the lesson is most valuable when applied. Awareness, humility, observation, and subtle influence, these are tools of leadership that transcend any manual or checklist. Use them wisely." As the jet continued its smooth flight, the sun painting streaks of gold across the sky, a quiet transformation had taken place. The pilot, humbled yet enlightened, had absorbed a lesson that would remain with him forever. The billionaire passenger, serene and composed, had demonstrated that true authority was not loud, not forceful, and not assumed. It was recognized, acknowledged, and wielded subtly, yet powerfully. The flight progressed, engine steady, the landscape below stretching endlessly. Inside, the cabin was filled with calm focus, quiet reflection, and the gentle acknowledgement of a lesson well taught. Ariana Cole had taken control of the flight not with force but with presence, and Captain Morris, once confident in his assumptions, now understood the true power of quiet authority, subtle influence, and perceptive leadership. The lesson was complete, the flight smooth, and the transformation profound. For those aboard, this journey was about far more than distance or altitude. It was a masterclass in humility, perception, and the invisible yet undeniable power of a quiet presence. The private jet sliced through the sky, the morning sun reflecting off its wings and casting shimmering patterns across the cabin. Captain Thomas Morris, seated firmly at the controls, had never felt a flight like this before. Not because of turbulence or technical challenges, but because of the weight of introspection settling upon him. Every glance at Ariana Cole, poised near the cockpit, reminded him of the transformation that had occurred since takeoff. What began as a simple misunderstanding over a seat had evolved into a profound lesson in perception, authority, and humility. The flight had passed smoothly in terms of mechanics, yet the mental journey had been anything but ordinary. Morris found himself replaying every interaction from the beginning. His polite insistence, the assumptions he had made about her status, the subtle defiance she had exhibited without ever raising her voice, and the moment of revelation when he finally realized the truth. Each recollection carried with it a lesson, an indelible mark on his understanding of human dynamics. Ariana Cole, serene and composed, observed him quietly. She did not speak, did not offer correction, nor did she need to. Her presence alone conveyed confidence, authority, and insight. The cabin crew, now fully aware of who she was, moved efficiently but respectfully, ensuring every detail of comfort and service reflected her position. There was no need for fanfare. The acknowledgement was subtle, mutual, and filled with quiet respect. Morris exhaled slowly, shaking off the lingering tension in his shoulders. He realized that the humility he felt was not a weakness but a rare opportunity for growth. Leadership, he understood now, was not about asserting dominance, commanding attention, or relying solely on protocol. It was about observation, understanding, adaptability, and the acknowledgement of truth, even when it challenged long-held assumptions. He glanced toward Ariana, who had tilted her head slightly, watching him with measured curiosity. "Ms. Cole," he began cautiously, his voice steadier than before, "I want to thank you again, not only for the flight but for the lessons. Your calmness, your awareness, and your presence, they've taught me more about leadership and humility than I could have imagined." Ariana's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. "Captain Morris," she replied softly, "lessons are most effective when recognized and applied. What you have learned here today is not merely about etiquette or protocol. It is about understanding authority, perception, and the subtle influence that exists in every interaction. Apply it wisely, and it will serve you far beyond the cockpit." The pilot nodded solemnly, absorbing her words. He felt a profound gratitude for the experience. For decades, he had relied on procedures, manuals, and the assumption that authority resided in titles, seats, and formal roles. Today, he had discovered a deeper dimension, that true authority could be quiet, subtle, and entirely dependent on recognition rather than assertion. He vowed silently to carry this lesson forward in all aspects of his life, both professional and personal. The crew worked efficiently, quietly adjusting cabin lighting, checking instruments, and preparing for the landing. The atmosphere, once filled with tension and uncertainty, had transformed into one of calm professionalism and mutual respect. Each movement reflected a new awareness, that the presence of Ariana Cole was more than just status. It was a masterclass in influence, patience, and perception. As the plane descended toward the airport, the landscape below shifted from snow-capped mountains to rolling plains, dotted with tiny towns and glistening rivers. The hum of the engines became a steady, soothing background rhythm. Morris focused intently on his instruments, but he could not help glancing occasionally at Ariana. She remained poised, serene, her gaze moving to the horizon with a quiet confidence that radiated authority. "Captain," she spoke softly, breaking the silence without disrupting his concentration, "do you feel the difference in how a situation unfolds when assumptions are removed, when awareness guides action rather than preconception?" Morris reflected for a moment, adjusting the flaps and monitoring descent speed. "I do," he admitted. "It's remarkable how much clarity and control come from simply observing and acknowledging the true dynamics of a situation. I see now that assumptions cloud judgment far more than any external factors." Ariana nodded, her expression calm and deliberate. "Exactly. True leadership, true authority, is less about enforcing control and more about understanding context, observing subtleties, and adapting to reality. That awareness allows for decisions that are measured, fair, and effective." The jet approached the runway, its landing gear extending smoothly. Morris maintained focus, applying the precision and skill expected of an experienced pilot, yet his mind continued to reflect on the lessons he had absorbed. He realized that the flight had been a rare convergence of technical skill and human insight, a combination he had never fully considered until now. "Captain Morris," Ariana continued, her voice soft but insistent, "remember this. Authority is not diminished when humility is applied. Respect is not lessened when one acknowledges the strengths of others. True power lies in perception, patience, and the quiet exercise of influence. Never underestimate the impact of being present, attentive, and aware." Morris felt a shiver of realization run through him. Every protocol he had ever followed, every manual he had memorized, and every assumption he had held was now reframed by this encounter. Authority was not about the seat, the title, or the checklist. It was about recognition, presence, and insight. He adjusted the controls carefully, bringing the jet in smoothly, landing with precision and confidence, yet guided by a newly awakened awareness. The wheels touched the tarmac with barely a sound, the jet gliding across the runway as engines throttled back. Morris exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and reflection washing over him. The landing had been flawless, but the greater victory was internal. The lesson had been fully realized, the understanding firmly cemented. Ariana rose gracefully as the plane slowed, her poise untouched by the flight's turbulence, literal and figurative. She acknowledged the crew with a quiet nod, her presence radiating calm authority. "Thank you, Captain," she said softly, her gaze meeting his. "Your skill is evident, but your openness to learning is what will distinguish you as a true leader. Remember this lesson, and it will serve you well in all endeavors." Morris, humbled and grateful, bowed his head slightly. "Ms. Cole, thank you. I will not forget this. Your guidance, patience, and insight have been invaluable. It has been an honor to fly with you." Ariana's smile deepened just slightly, a gesture of genuine acknowledgement and approval. "The honor is mutual, Captain. Leadership is not merely about what one commands, but what one inspires in others. Today, you have learned that. Carry it with you." The jet came to a complete stop at the terminal, engines idling. Passengers and staff prepared for disembarkation, yet the real journey, the lessons learned, the humility gained, the insight absorbed would travel far beyond the physical distance covered. Morris felt a renewed sense of purpose, a rare clarity born from the combination of skill, reflection, and the quiet influence of a truly remarkable passenger. As Ariana gathered her belongings, the crew moved efficiently, ensuring every detail was attended to. She did not hurry, nor did she demand attention. She simply existed, commanding respect through presence and the subtle, undeniable authority she wielded. Morris watched her, understanding fully that the lessons of the flight were not just about protocol, aviation, or etiquette. They were about perception, humility, influence, and leadership. The doors opened, and the gentle hum of engines was replaced by the bustle of the tarmac. Ariana stepped forward, poised and serene, acknowledging Morris and the crew with a calm nod. The pilot felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and deep respect. He had learned far more than the technicalities of flight that day. He had witnessed the quiet mastery of authority in its purest form. As she departed, Morris reflected on the entire journey. The assumptions, the quiet defiance, the revelation, and the lessons in humility and leadership. The flight had been an ordinary task on paper, yet extraordinary in practice. It had reminded him that true authority is often silent, perception is fragile, and respect is earned through awareness, acknowledgement, and thoughtful action. The private jet, now empty of its billionaire passenger, stood on the tarmac as the sun climbed higher into the sky. For Captain Thomas Morris, the journey would continue far beyond the destination. He had experienced a rare, invaluable lesson, one that would shape his career, his perspective, and his understanding of leadership for years to come. And for Ariana Cole, the flight had been another quiet demonstration of the subtle power she wielded effortlessly. She had revealed assumptions, reshaped perceptions, and imparted lasting lessons, all without confrontation, all without raising her voice. Authority, she had shown, was not in the chair one occupied, but in the recognition of truth, perception, and the quiet exercise of influence. The plane's engines powered down, the tarmac staff moving efficiently around it. Inside, the echoes of the flight lingered, lessons, reflections, and insights carried forward not on wings, but in the minds and hearts of those who had witnessed the quiet mastery of authority. For everyone aboard, the experience would remain unforgettable, not for the speed, luxury, or destination, but for the profound understanding of perception, humility, and the subtle, invisible power of true authority.